I think the whole AI piece and the way documentation is going to be moving in that direction, it's going to actually be harder to recruit therapists if you don't have AI. I actually think that that's going to be a critical thing to be integrated into EMRs in the next year. It's already ramping up at such a fast pace that I feel like that is really going to be a necessary thing to attract talent. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Cindy Weinberger, owner of Mobile Therapy Group. Paul and Cindy discuss overcoming personal challenges while running a business, strategic delegation and team building, reducing dependency on the business owner, and lastly, adapting to change and embracing technology. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
Give me the lowdown on what your practice is right now.
Mobile Therapy Group is, yeah. Well, I started Mobile Therapy Group. We're coming up on our 5-year anniversary. Amazing. I can't believe it's been 5 years. But it is a mobile practice, and we have a brick and mortar, 2 brick and mortar locations. So it started out as just hand therapy. I'm a certified hand therapist, so I started the company doing mobile hand therapy and quickly realized that there was a need for physical therapy for sure. This was during COVID, so it was a very interesting time to start a business. But over the 5 years, I've grown from myself being the sole provider to having physical therapy, occupational therapy, and certified hand therapy. We have 15 contractors slash employees, some independent contractors. And we cover all of Palm Beach County and some of Broward County in Florida. So we have 2 small clinics that are primarily hand therapy clinics. One is in West Palm and the other is in Coral Springs. It's about 45, 50 minutes apart. And the rest is mobile. So our physical therapists primarily go into the home, see patients in the home under Medicare B. We also bill out of network under other insurances and, of course, cash pay. So that's sort of the model that we have. We also do some physical therapy in our West Palm Beach office because we have certain patients that live in the building where we provide the therapy, or we have patients that need both physical and occupational therapy and they'd like to be seen back to back. So we do have physical therapy space in the West Palm clinic as well.
And out of curiosity, obviously, like the snapshot of what you are today is probably not what you were 5 years ago. What came first? Was it the physical locations? Was it the mobile clinic? What was the beginning?
The mobile came first, and adding on staff for the mobile practice came first. I did not hire admin or get space right away. It was really me doing all of the billing, all of the scheduling, all of the insurance verifications. I started feeling after it was about a year and a half in before I opened up my first clinic space.
What was like? What made you want to do that? Because and I imagine that you're signing a lease. That's a multi-year
Absolutely.
commitment, bigger
Yes.
overhead. Like it's probably not the highest thing on anybody's radar to do that.
And actually, it wasn't even, I had a practice in New Hampshire also, a small practice that I had sold. And when I moved to Florida, I sort of committed to myself I wasn't going to do this again because it's a lot of work. But here I was laid off at the beginning of COVID, and I was like, I'm not, and I was miserable working in the job that I had. I was very unhappy. So it was sort of my push, I guess, my message that was like, I need to do this again. But to answer your question about the location is Honestly, the easiest way to describe it is it was based on my personal safety. I was checking insurances at traffic lights, and I was returning phone calls and using my phone way too much while I was driving. And I also started, I'm a little bit older than your average person starting a practice. And I started really getting tired of driving and schlepping is the word. A lot of carrying of bags. And it's very hot in Florida in the summertime. And I'm, carrying my bags in my cart across the parking lot. And I was feeling like this isn't what I want to do forever. It was a great start and a great way to get going, but the business was really growing pretty quickly, and I decided that I needed to park myself in a place where patients could come to me so that I could also manage the business and be in an office. So it really was the next logical step for me was to get space.
And this is maybe a little bit, it's gonna feel like a trick question, but I'm genuinely curious. Like, knowing what you know today,
Yeah.
would you do it all the same way, you think? Or would you have started, like, would you have changed anything about how you grew from mobile to having physical locations and all that?
That's a good question. I think I probably would do it again the way that I have done it. I think also over time, when you're meeting with referring providers, you're meeting with people that are going to be referring to you. I think having that office space gives you, what's that word I'm looking for?
Maybe is it credibility maybe? Is
Credibility,
it
thank you. For some
Yeah.
reason, I have trouble finding that word, but I think having office space gives you credibility. And when somebody comes in, you are an established practice, you have space to show them, and there's a lot of competition out there. There are so many mobile med B physical therapy practices popping up right now everywhere. And something has to stand you apart and have people trust that you are the one that they want to refer to. And I think having an office space gives you a little bit of a leg up, a little bit of credibility compared to someone
Yeah.
who's completely working out of their car. Plus, the hand therapy also is a definite niche for us because it's very unusual. And there's very few hand therapists that go into patients' homes and do custom splinting and all of that and take Medicare. It's like kind of unheard of. So the hand surgeons in the area are very excited about that.
I'm curious, and again, I've, full disclosure, never been a PT and never, all those things. So you can talk to me like a second grader here. But that, on the one hand, it feels like there's more and more mobile clinics starting up. So there's this
Yes.
competition. On the other hand, what you've described is this niche that seems to be like a open kind of an open field that nobody's really getting into. Um, what's your hypothesis on that? Why is that? Is it I don't even know what the guess would be. Like,
My
why is it?
hypothesis of why there isn't more hand therapists that are
Yeah,
mobile.
yeah, yeah. Because
Well,
yeah. Again, broadly speaking, there's a lot of mobile, healthcare things starting, right? But then in your case, you're niching down with a specific discipline, and I'm just kind of curious. Like, is that because more sort of hand therapists don't know, they don't want to? Is it? What's your hypothesis?
I think it's a couple of things. I think it's a couple of things. I think like with any discipline, people are nervous and afraid to jump in and do something like this, number one. There's also the CHT community is not very big. There's 420 certified hand therapists in the entire state of Florida. It's not a lot. So there's not that many. A lot of them are employed. They're all working. They're working at large clinics or employed by orthopedic surgeons. So I don't think there's that many certified hand therapists that are really struggling to find work and probably have never even thought of the possibility. I've had certified hand therapists reaching out to me saying, "I don't understand. How do you do custom splinting in the home?" And I'm like, "Same way you do it in the clinic. You just have to bring." It's not rocket science, but I think it's a hard thing for a lot of people to conceptualize that it's even possible.
See, that is so fascinating. There's some research out there. So I come from the venture capital side of things, and it's a little bit different, but whatever. The point is, There's this like interesting statistics that came out a couple of years ago that in any given population, roughly 3% of that population will display entrepreneurial, and then maybe a tenth of them will actually act on it, and then the numbers of how many are actually successful drops off pretty quickly. So it's really fascinating because as soon as you said there were only like 400 of these CHTs, first of all, I had no idea it was that tight. I thought it was
Yeah.
I would have guessed 4,000 or
I think I can give you the actual number. We'd have to turn off the recording and I can Google it for you. But I think it's like maybe 4,000 in the country.
that is so wild to me. That
I'll Google,
okay, so
hold on, I'm
now
going
it
to
makes
Google it
sense. You should
for you.
absolutely open the Denver office and you should
I
absolutely
know.
just dominate this. This is crazy.
How many CHTs are there in the USA as of 2024? 181 new ones this year, but
That is wild. Cindy, that is
yeah.
wild. Okay, now I'm curious. Did
Well, now
you
I probably need to
yeah.
get you that information now, don't I?
Oh, well, we're directionally right. Like if you said, "Uh-oh, I meant 400,000 and I said 400," then that's different. But here, if the difference is 400 in Florida
Yeah,
versus
but I
600, it
felt like
doesn't
I
really
should give
matter.
you that number. Hold on a sec. In 2024, as of 2024, there are 949 CHTs in the United States.
Wait,
There
say
are
say that number again? 600.
6,949, so just under 7,000
Okay,
in the whole
7,000
US,
in the US. Yeah.
425 in the state of Florida, and 2.6 million hand injuries per year.
Okay, so this is where, like, my venture capital brain comes on,
Yeah,
where it's like, without knowing anything else about this industry, it's like, you should absolutely go investigate that Denver office because there's a market there. That's incredible. Okay, so I'm just, like, floored by that. I would have thought you were gonna give me a number in the tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of
no.
thousands, but so
Hundreds of thousands of occupational therapists.
right, yes, right.
And I think 90%, I'll have to check my info again. 87% of those certified hand therapists are occupational therapists. 12% are physical therapists. So there's more and more physical therapists that are going into hand therapy as a specialty. And 1% are both PT and OT, credentialed for both.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So as you were building out your practice in Florida there, this is now you've got my like I'm just floored because I didn't realize it was such a like so okay, let me step back. Just as an aside, on the when again, I come from the venture capital community and that's just kind of how I think. And one of the things that I always say is like there's the niches get all the riches.
Yeah.
Which by the way, I'm gonna probably gonna get in trouble because I don't know whether you say niche or
Or
niche, but it doesn't
niche.
rhyme if I
You
say
could
niche.
say
But
they get the riches.
that's what we'll do. The niches get all the riches. I don't know. We'll see. Or it's fancy. So that's why like my gears are turning because it's like, wait a second, this is very, very fascinating. But it's obviously not the easiest thing. I mean, there's simple versus easy, and they're not always the same. So when you think about your experience over the last couple of years, when you think about like the hiring you had to do and sort of the staying up to date with the research and the credentialing and things like that.
Sure.
Are there any like operational weird things that make this kind of harder for you as you're running your business, particularly in the hand therapy world?
I think the things that are specific to hand therapy is DME licensure if you want to bill for custom splinting. And that is quite a project with a lot of hurdles to jump over. And the first hurdle that you have to jump over is that you need a physical office space. So
Right.
you can't be a purely mobile hand therapist and bill for your DME, your L codes. And um, there are ways, I'm not going to say work around it. The rule is the rule, but for example, you could contract with, say, a chiropractor or an existing PT practice and say, "Hey, can I use your address and set up a little corner with some splinting material and come in here and make splints once in a while?" And if you can come up with an arrangement like that, then you still can make your splints at on the road, but you have to be able to show that you also have a small location in which you can make the splints because they will come out and look and make sure that you have a legitimate office space.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have to do
Yeah.
that in order to bill. The
Uh,
L codes. Yeah.
I mean, I'm still so surprised with it. So, like, if we were to just time travel back to the first, when you first started this business, would the Cindy of 5 years ago be surprised of where you ended up today? Or would you like, did you always know this is where you're gonna end up? I mean, I know you kinda like said, well, you got pushed into this because of the layoff and COVID and all that stuff. So obviously there's some truth there too. But there's also a certain amount of grit that is required. And I think sometimes that's anyway, I'm curious, like, did you kind of see that? What did you think the practice was gonna look like 5 years ago if we were talking then?
I didn't think it would grow quite as quickly as it has, honestly,
Yeah.
but I did when I opened it, if I never thought I was going to expand, if I thought it was always going to be me doing hand therapy, I would have probably named it, mobile hand therapy or something like that. But in my mind, I knew I was going to expand it, and I also, because of my age, when I started this business, I knew that within 15 years of starting it, I was going to be retiring or would like to be retiring. So obviously, you have different goals when you're a little bit older. And my real goal in setting this up was to be able to grow a business that could also provide for me and my family without having to be the person treating patients all day long, because that's not sustainable for the future. And I do have a grandchild on the way, and I in Denver, Colorado, and I would like the freedom to be able to go and spend a week or 2 weeks and run my business as I need to, but not have a full caseload of patients that are relying on me. So that was definitely my goal. It was absolutely my goal when I started out, was to create something that I could essentially retire and run. Yeah.
I think that's really neat because I think that um, most people that decide to start something, if they make it through that first year, I mean, it's just difficult, right? Going from 0 to 1 in a figurative sense is very, very hard. And so if they make it through that first year, the vast majority of business owners sort of have ended up creating themselves a new job that's arguably even harder than the one they came from. But in your case, you sort of hit that escape velocity, or at least kept focused on what it would take to get to that escape velocity, so that you have the ability to go to Denver to be there for your grandchild.
In fact, as soon as I started hiring, one of my KPIs that I have followed consistently is what percentage of my business is mine, is me treating. And it's been really important to me to see that number go down, down, down. And now I'm like at 1% or less. So I'm good with that.
That's
But
yeah,
that
no,
was an important KPI for me to track. And I know that's
that's
not something
interesting.
everybody tracks, but that was important
Ha-
to me. Yeah.
Well, let's now that you've opened that can of worms, what are like just I'm sure there's a lot of KPIs you look at, but if you had to like kind of if I was a fly on the wall in your office, what would I see? What 3 to 5 KPIs would I see you look at the most on a given week or day or month?
I would say the biggest one, because it's the easiest and simplest to look at, is number of visits. How many visits are we doing per week? How many new evaluations are we doing per week and per month? Those are the most important ones, I think, for me. And then, of course, I'm always looking at my profit and loss, gross and net income constantly. It's not really a KPI, just a financial thing. I look at cancellations, but it's a little different in a mobile practice. I feel like that's not as critical of a KPI as if you have an office space and you need people coming in to you.
This I find I mean, you are like Cindy, the more time I spend with you, the more interesting you become, which there's a compliment buried in there somewhere, but I don't hear practice owners talk about finance or financials very often. And you just kind of you just casually said P&L right there. Is that is that something that came from your prior jobs, or did you read a book?
I had a small, like I said, I had a small practice in New Hampshire before I moved. And my husband is an entrepreneur and ran a company. And for a while, I was sort of the QuickBooks person for him. I was, learned how to code expenses and look at and we I use QuickBooks, and it's just very easy to click a button and see your profit and loss. And So I've just kind of learned it. It's not really that hard to learn. And obviously, basic business is you better have more coming in than you have going out. So, you know,
There's your street MBA, everybody. Just
there
make
you
more money
go.
than you spend.
Got to have more coming in than going out, and you have to track it, and you have to kind of know where it's going, and understand, like, geez, if it's really low this month, what is there something I can change, or is it because it's January and all of those deductibles are hitting, and so it's going to take longer to bring your money in at the beginning of the year. You have to kind of understand that, and I think it's really important to be
Yeah.
tracking that every
Yeah.
day. I mean, when I
Yeah.
wake up in the morning, the first thing I look at on my phone is my account.
Right.
Because, in healthcare, it's not like a normal job where on Friday your paycheck is going to come in and you have an exact expected amount to see in your account. In this, I wake up and it's like some days it's Christmas. Like, oh, wow, a big deposit came in overnight that I did. With Medicare, you don't know exactly when it's going to hit your account. And then you could wake up another morning and say, oh, geez, why are these numbers going down so rapidly and not going up? So, that's a daily at least view. I wouldn't say, you can't get freaked out about it on a daily basis, obviously, when it drops or
Yeah.
whatever, but at least to be aware of it and know what's going on so that you can stop something that is bleeding if it is, or whatever.
In some of our other, conversations, you've sort of talked about AI and things like that, and maybe we'll talk about that here in a second. But before we get there, you've got this interesting perspective of, no pun intended, you're like on the ground. You're doing the mobile side. You've got the physical locations. You're doing DME. You've got this sort of the Venn diagram of your business is very fascinating. So as you think about, I guess let me just ask you this: you're what do you where do you see what are the biggest changes you think are coming down the pipe? And I'll leave this question very broad for you, but I'm just curious, like, as you think about the industry you're in, and let's say we fast forward to 5 years from now. So what is that, 2029?
Mhm.
What are your what's your predictions? Like, what are the big changes? Is telehealth a bigger thing? I don't know. Like, I'm because you must be thinking about these things behind the scenes, even if it's just sitting at a stoplight or jumping on an airplane to go see your grandchild.
I think the whole AI piece and the way documentation is going to be moving in that direction, I think it's going to actually be harder to recruit therapists if you don't have AI. I actually think that that's going to be a critical thing to be integrated into EMRs in the next year. I think it's already ramping up at such a fast pace that I feel like that is really going to be a necessary thing to attract talent so that's one thing. And with reimbursement continuing to be hit every year, I mean, I'm hoping that at some point there's a shift in that reimbursement was higher in the 90s. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's literally the only profession that I know of that, instead of it even growing with inflation, it's literally going in the opposite direction. I don't know what's going to happen with that with our new president. I don't know what's going to happen. So it's definitely something that I am both concerned about and interested in, of course, to see for the viability of my company and all of these therapy companies, and for access to healthcare to patients. So I think all of that is going to be a big factor for us. Um, yeah, and also now I lost my train of thought.
So you're saying AI is coming. You said that reimbursements, that
Lowering
that will be.
reimbursements. Oh, and the
Yep.
need, I think there's going to be more and more of a need to add on cash pay, more and more cash pay options within your practice. Um, but that's not so easy. It's not so easy to do. You might have to invest $10,000 to get a piece of equipment. It could take years to get that back. I don't know how quickly, and it all depends on your clientele and where you live. So not everybody lives in a place that people can afford to do those things. So I feel like I hate to say this, but I feel like that purely cash based, I mean, purely insurance based practices that don't have add-ons and are not like dumping 3 patients an hour on their staff, I think they're going to really struggle. And I feel thankful that for my practice that I live in Palm Beach County. So there is certainly affluence in this area. There's people that are happy to pay for their health care. And then I feel terrible when I get a phone call. I get them every single day of someone, oh, you have wonderful reviews. We want to come see you. Do you take Medicaid? No, we don't take Medicaid. Do you take Cigna? Well, we're out of network with Cigna and you have a $5,000 deductible. So, and so I turn away patients all the time because we literally can't afford to treat them, which is just so sad. So the access to care for so many people isn't there. So then they're settling for someone else that is in their network. And in order for those practices to be in network, they're going to have three patients at the table because they can't afford to take Cigna or whatever. I shouldn't pick on Cigna, but whatever commercial insurance with this capped reimbursement doesn't even cover the cost of your therapist. So these are all the things that I think are going to impact our profession.
It's interesting, you know, maybe I just have some quick comments on all three of those things, and let's see if where this goes. Let's work backwards. So this idea of cash pay integration, and this in combination with how do you even acquire the equipment and all that. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that like these businesses are going to go hybrid. It's become very fashionable lately on the internet to say go entirely cash pay or go entirely not. But the truth is, it's kind of down the middle. It's like when I go to my grocery store, they don't care how I pay as long as I pay. And some people pay with Snap cards, some people pay with cash. Some people, it's the way of the world right now. So I think hybrid is the future. I definitely agree there.
And we are hybrid for sure. I would say that we are. Yeah.
I think this other comment you made about, you said something about like, well, you might need the equipment, but you might have to take some time to how long is the ROI and stuff like that. One of the little things that nobody ever talks about with practice owners, and frankly with business owners on the whole, is this idea that like here we are, we're recording this right now in the latter part of 2024. Interest rates are still very high, but one of the unspoken little pieces of advice that I give to a lot of business owners across a lot of other industries is you should be you should consider establishing a small line of credit with your bank, even if you don't intend to use it.
Yep.
Because ideally what you want to do is you want to one of our other clients, Ben Gallen, who's on our podcast, talked about this a couple months ago, is this idea that when interest rates were very low, he had locked in some large line of credits. And the way those typically work with most banks is that you basically say, okay, if I'd like 100K line of credit, and they say, okay, you're approved. Here's the amount of interest it would be if you utilize it. And by the way, it's a 1% origination fee. So you pay $1,000 just to kind of open the account, which obviously it's a lot of money to people, but just hear me out for a second. The idea being here that like once they approve it, once you've got the paper, you can exercise it whenever you want. And typically you can exercise it when, to your point, maybe the Medicare payment didn't come in, you've already got that line of credit and you can exercise it and then repay it in 3 days. On the flip side, let's say you had to go get equipment, you could theoretically do that. I guess what I'm just saying is on this topic, right now is probably not the best time to open one of those lines of credit
Because
because
the
interest
interest
rates
rates
are,
are
are
high.
great.
Yeah.
But depending on what your bank's willing to give you, it may not be a bad idea to at least open a very tiny one, even if you intend to never open it, because now the years that it's open allows you to expand it as interest rates go down. So that's something we can talk about later. But I think it's something very interesting because access to cash for expansion tends to be one of the bigger issues for people.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and then jumping over to your other comment about, Medicare insurance reimbursements and stuff. This is also a fascinating one because factually, you are right. The inflation goes up, the reimbursements keep going down. This is not sustainable. Um, but yet, like everybody sort of like is yelling into the void. Should it be better? Should it be better? I think the thing is like it is going to take. So I think the answer is it can get better, and I think that and this is just a personal opinion before I get in trouble, but I'll just say, like, I think the way this works is the people that write the laws are not the people any of us see on TV. We see these elected people on TV, but really the people that write the regulations are the staffers that are way far out of the light and working the long hours. And fundamentally, like, I think I'm an optimist. So fundamentally, these are all probably very good people that just don't have access to the data. You and I both know that I think we can both agree, I should say, that anecdotally, if we helped strengthen a patient so that a fall never happened, then we would then theoretically that patient would not need the emergency hip replacement and then all the other therapy that comes after. Like there are preventative things we could have
Oh
done.
my gosh, so
It
many preventative things could be done.
Right, and if we look at, like, how legislation is usually written in other industries, and again, I come from venture capital where we would have to kinda get involved in these things about how do you deal with unrealized gains? Like, I mean, we're like the villain probably on most TV news right now, right? But at the same time, you can't tax income that hasn't been earned, like, that's unrealized gains, and so we had to, like, educate as an industry, we had to educate legislators and say, "Oh, you think we're getting billions of dollars from this company, but where is it? It's not in my bank account.
Right,
So
right, right,
if
right,
the IRS says, "Give me 37% of that," I don't have that to give you.
right, right, right,
Um,
absolutely.
and so as you educate, like, that's how and I still on a personal note, this actually worked. 10 years 12 years ago now, Congress signed in the law for what they call the Jobs Act, which was actually the crowdfunding act is really what it was. It was interesting because, up until that point, the average person like you or me or whatever could not really legally invest in Cindy's new mobile therapy business. Now, it would happen because, like, Uncle Sally liked you or Uncle Sam liked you or Aunt Sally liked you or whatever, right? But from a legal standpoint, back from 1933, when the crash happened, the government said, "Hey, you can't have all these swindling entrepreneurs taking money."
Right,
And I
right,
remember
right,
back in like 2010, 2011, somebody had introduced me to I guess a young congressman in California. And somehow it came up and he said something. I said, this is already happening, right? Like entrepreneurs around this country are already getting money from their friends and family to get off the ground, whether it's for a restaurant or mobile therapy or whatever. And you would have thought his jaw fell on the ground. He's like, well, that's illegal. They're not accredited investors. I'm like, they don't even know that's a rule.
right, right,
it's
right. They're not even
and
aware
so
of that. Yeah.
so on this particular topic of like how do you fight reimbursement rates? Again, I'm an optimist, but I think the solution here is that more of our industry, PT, OT, hand therapists, all of us, we've got to figure out how to get not only to the table at these discussions, but also how to expose our data to prove this because everybody once you can show that there are better outcomes, I think if we can make hand therapy and PT and OT and all these things primary care, or at least perceived as
Mhm,
primary care,
mhm.
that I think that changes.
Yeah, you're right. The primary care, that is a very good point, and I think could really, actually, speaking to the primary care, I don't want to change the topic, but we've been talking with concierge practices. It's a big thing here in Florida. I don't know if it's big where you are, but in Florida, there are way more people over 65 than there are doctors to treat them. And as a result, the care, I don't want to say the care isn't good. I think ultimately the care is good, but people really have to wait in line. It can take a long time to get a call back or I've had so many patients say to me and to about my company, like, you guys have great, like the fact that you called me back so quickly, and the fact that, like, to me that's like, of course, how else are you going to run a business if you can't be reliable? But people don't expect that, believe it or not, from healthcare companies. So, speaking with concierge doctors, it has been a really nice match for us because they do give that kind of care because they are paid to by these patients. And one of them in particular, we've been talking to, he's interested in creating an intake for his new patients that includes balance screening, and that includes like a therapist doing some kind of an initial assessment to determine if there's needs there. And so we're going to be working with him on developing a program for that, and I just
Yeah,
think that's so valuable, and it does kind of bring us a little bit into the realm of
right.
primary care to
Primary,
some
yeah.
degree. Yep.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, like, complex problem there, but again, I'm an optimist, and I think it's solvable, but I don't think it's gonna be, like I don't think it's somebody's gonna descend from on high and magically fix it. I think it's gonna be a lot of little bites at the elephant where, we sort of push our way in. So, and then I think that brings it back to your first point, which is this concept of AI and where it gets utilized. And this is a very interesting one because technically the challenges that I'm gonna get in trouble with like all the nerds that listen to this, but I'm one of them too. It's interesting. The technical implementation of AI is a largely solved problem. It's not, yeah, I mean, this can go in the podcast. I just won't say it out loud until somebody gets to this portion of the podcast. But like, I've got AI running in test environments and stuff like that. The
Sure.
interesting thing that's happening right now, though, and I was just talking about this with my team internally a few hours ago today. Um, there's this interesting thing happening right now where well, there's two things happening right now. First of all of the companies we both know that are trying to introduce AI into the practices, the first thing that's interesting happening here is that if you look at the terms of service for all those companies, they are in the contract themselves. Like, I won't speak for you. If anybody is like me, the vast majority of times you sign the terms of service for using somebody's software, you rarely read the 87 pages of
Of
legalese.
course.
All of these AI, especially these AI companies, AI focused companies in their marketing, their terms of service are fully indemnifying themselves and limiting the cost of or limiting their liability simply to the maximum amount that you've paid them in a given time period. So, in other words, like you're in just basic math here. If you're paying $200 a month for their software for 12 months, well, the maximum they're on the hook if something goes wrong is $2,400 a month. So that's interesting thing. Number one is like, hey, if you believe in AI so much and your marketing so amazing, why is the indemnification limiting it?
Right, right, right.
Uh,
Yeah.
the second trend that's really interesting that's happening right now is that business insurances, and I'll just speak for myself in my own personal capacity for just a moment. I run a small family office for all of my investing in startups and things like that. We're recording this in November of 2024, and I just got all my premium renewals for next year for my E&O, errors and omission, general liability, and all that stuff. The interesting red line that has now been added to all of the business policies, not by choice, it just showed up and I happened to do a red line check, is they've excluded any usage of AI by default. You have to get a separate
Interesting.
rider on top of that.
Wow.
And so I called our E&O provider and I was like, "Hey, what's up with that?" This agent or representative that I was speaking to said, "Well, look, the principle of it is that we're ensuring." And the example he used was my in-house CP, my in-house controller or finance person, whatever. The example he used was he said, like, look, we are ensuring any errors that controller makes, any errors or omissions that human makes. But if that person uh, used Chat GPT to ask somebody or ask a question about how something should be classified, we're not taking on the liability of whether or not that AI model was updated with the latest stuff. Um, and so I was like, okay, so then I was like, well, let me be very clear then. You're still insuring this person. So if they still made the wrong decision, are you insuring them? And this is where it gets interesting. He said, not if they used any sort of AI tool. And I was like, well, how are you going
Interesting.
to know that? And he's like, well, look, if we get into a big mess anyway, we're going to get depose everybody and figure it out. And I
Sure.
just thought it was very fascinating because everybody, you've got all these marketing guys pushing AI into the conversation. I get it. You have to do that. I get it. But on the other side, it's like, wait a second, what are the risks here? Um, but I think it's manageable, by the way. I just want to be clear. I'm not anti AI. I think it's inevitable. But I think it's one of those things where I think 2025 is going to be a fascinating year because somebody's going to get hurt in this. And it's going to either be an insurance company or it's going to be some large practice that didn't realize that they couldn't do a certain thing, and then that's going to change the conversation of AI. But
Yeah.
I still think it's coming. I do. And I think it's
Yeah.
in on our roadmap. It's in everybody else's roadmap. All good. I think it's probably almost a good place to end it too. By the way, I think you've said a lot of really interesting things today. By the way, and I think the one that I think I didn't expect. But that I think hits the hardest with what you said was you said something along the lines of like, it is going to be harder and harder to recruit more clinicians if you don't have an AI sort of strategy or set of tools in place. And that's a very fascinating point. I think that's true. Um, I'm going to sound like a boomer or luddite or whatever the kids are going to call me these days. But like the other day, I happened to be walking past my wife's office. We both work from home, and so I happened to be walking past her office, and I wasn't snooping. I wanted to say hello, and I saw her one of her tabs open, and it was Chat GPT, and I was like, "Hey, what are you doing with that?" And she's like, "Oh, I can't live without it." And I we've been married a long time, right? So I'm like, "What? This is the first time hearing about this. What are you talking about? What do you use it for?" And it's literally on her second monitor, always open, and it's just she's like, "Yeah, I mean, I used to just type questions into Google and try to find the right search to get the answer I needed, and now I just she uses it more than Google."
I printed it because that's the old fashioned way. But I'm a runner, and I'm only kind of comfortable right now with a 5K. And in December, I'd like to do a 10K. And so I went into Chat GPT and I typed in, can you give me a training schedule to go from a 5K to a 10K in a 6 week time frame? And they printed out 6 weeks for me, which I printed so I could like track it. And it gave it to me in kilometers. And so then I wrote, can you please? I don't think I said please. I should have, but I think I said, convert this to miles for me. And no problem. It converted it to miles for me. And I printed it off and I'm following this little 6 week program, Chat GPT.
That is so neat.
Now,
That is
is
so
it the
neat.
best program? I probably could have done a lot more research on runners' sites and probably found something better, but I just needed a guideline. I'm not training for a marathon, just a 10K. So I was like, I can follow that. That'll work. And but yes, so I am starting to use it a lot more myself, and it's pretty
Well,
amazing actually what it can
the
do. So yeah,
unsolicited advice I'll give you here is that
yeah.
I'm a runner too, and I actually think the marathon distance is easier than the 5K distance.
My body
So
doesn't think so.
that's right. Okay, that's fair. I think if my body had something to say with it, it would probably agree too. But
Yeah, no, my body is still struggling with the 3 miles, but I mean, with the, 5K, so I'm really pushing myself to do this, but,
I love it.
um,
I love it. Well, Cindy,
there's
I'm
one
gonna
other thing there's one other
yeah,
thing I just
yeah.
wanna say. I know we're pretty much out of time, but I don't know if this is important to slip in somewhere, is just one statement about obstacles that come up when you're running a business and how sometimes they can be very, very scary and you don't know what's going to happen on the other side of it. But most of the time, I think obstacles help you to grow. And I say that because a year and a half ago, a year and a half ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and I was in the middle of this whole like running this business and growing it. And I had my own caseload, of course, in the clinic. I had opened the clinic, and I kind of didn't know what I was going to do because I didn't know how this was going to impact me and my health. And am I going to be able to treat? Am I going to need chemo? Am I not? If I do need chemo, do you work when you're? I mean, this is all new chartered territory. And in my kind of fear, I guess you could say, of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I need to be able to focus on my health. That's when I hired my full-time admin and hired a full-time hand therapist to replace myself. Now, financially, I would not have made those decisions at that point in the business. It was a little earlier than I would have. So I was a little like, oh, this is a lot of money, but I got to focus on my health, and I can always get rid of everybody at the other side and go back to how I was. But of course, that didn't happen and it helped me to grow. So I never replaced those people. I just replaced myself in my own company, which was like the biggest gift I could have given myself. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a general statement that when you hit an obstacle, sometimes solving that obstacle will bring you to a place that you didn't expect to be. and sometimes it's better. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and I'm sorry you went through that, but it
yeah.
sounds like everything kinda turned out
And
for the
I'm
better,
fine. I'm cancer
everything. Yeah.
free. No problem
Uh
now, just so you know.
but I think that also speaks to what you said earlier about that one particular KPI you watched, which was that percentage of, I think either visits or revenue that was dependent on you directly, and you've now driven it down to less than 1%.
Correct.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's the thing is, like, people sort of sometimes don't realize that, there are times like that where it is worth, crushing your own margins temporarily to replace yourself
Correct.
because the
Correct.
other side looks a lot better.
Right. Right.
So
So
I think that's great. Well, Cindy, this is amazing. I think we're gonna pull you back onto the show, and if nothing else, I'll just tell people you're probably the one. You're probably one of the few customers that is probably the more AI forward customers that I've seen, which is really neat. So you're going to be on the internal testing list for some of that
sounds
stuff.
good. You gotta grow with what's happening in the world, or you're just gonna be left behind. That's how I look at it. So,
Isn't that the truth?
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.